Welcome back. All right, so in my list videos, let's go ahead and try my best to rank the tandems as they're currently made up, and this is recorded July the 21st, so things can still change before the start of the season, obviously. I'm going to do this ranking a little bit different. I've pulled out the board that I used to use for the previews over the last couple years. Previews I'm going to be doing differently coming into this season, so I probably will not be using this board. So this board's kind of a free agent to use however I see fit this coming regular season. And so, yeah, I'm even considering using 4-foot by 2-foot boards for reviews on certain nights. But at any rate, that all being said, ranking tandems from 1 through 32 gets difficult because not every goaltending tandem is necessarily clear cut right now. There are some teams that could very well be carrying 3 goaltenders. So I've taken that into consideration in the names I've got written on the page. And I've ranked 1 through 32. We'll have 32 in this corner, 1 in that corner. And let's go ahead and start things off with number 32, which is the Philadelphia Flyers. So the Flyers, their tandem appears to be, so we'll put a 32 there. And it's Ersson and Fedotov. The reason that they end up at 32nd on the board is simply neither Ersson nor Fedotov have shown that they can be an NHL level starter. Ersson's numbers were bad. Fedotov's weren't good. Limited sample size with Fedotov. But I don't know that I look at Philadelphia right now and say, well, clearly this is their starting goaltender. So that's definitely an issue. Number 31. And right here, Calgary. So for Calgary, it's a very similar story. So I want Wolf to be an excellent starter in the NHL. I'd like to see Vladar, become a really, really strong goaltender for Calgary. However, neither of them have been a starting goaltender over a full season. The loss of Markstrom definitely drops Calgary down quite a bit. So 32 and 31 to me are kind of clear cut. These are teams that are in the midst of rebuilds, and so odds are their goaltending might be kind of rough to watch this year. But again, Wolf could be an excellent goaltender for Calgary and prove this ranking completely wrong. It's just I kind of have to go by what they've done thus far in their NHL careers. Number 30, Columbus. So for Columbus, their tandem is Merzlikins. I'm giving him the benefit of the doubt that he's going to be the starter, although Tarasov may very well get some starts. And then there's the off chance, I'm going to put Greaves' name on the board because there is a chance that if Merzlikins has a rough start to the season, maybe you just pull the trigger and send Merzlikins down to Cleveland for a little bit and you bring up Greaves and go with Greaves and Tarasov. So, just saying. But again, for Columbus, if Elvis has a bounce back season, they could be a lot better. If Tarasov or Greaves take that next step, that could help their goaltending a lot. But it's just there's too many ifs. So that's how Columbus ends up 30th on the board. Number 29. See, I'm wearing a San Jose Sharks jersey because it's fun to wear. But San Jose, 29th. San Jose has the tandem of Blackwood and Vanacek. Remember Blackwood, I had to look for Vanacek there. And the interesting part is that both Blackwood and Vanacek have been starters or 1A, 1Bs in their past, so there's the possibility San Jose gets some decent goaltending at times. Again, they're not at the very bottom, but I can't justify having San Jose much higher than 29th on this board. And I'm not going to have them lower than 29th because, I do think they belong ahead of the other 3 teams. But yeah, ranking tandems is, again, it's kind of tough. Number 28, Minnesota. So for the Wild, this is one that could be completely and totally way off the mark. But Gustafsson had a rough season. Fleury's another year older. Marc-Andre Fleury's still a good goaltender, but he's not a starter at this point in his career. And Gustafsson, again, unless he has a big bounce back from last year, which he could. This is what I'm saying. Goaltending can be very unpredictable. But I have a hard time putting them higher than 28th on the board. Just based on the bad season Gustafsson had, Fleury being another year older. Apologies to Wild fans, but that's where I have them right now when it comes to the goaltending tandem position. Number 27. So for Buffalo, it is an interesting position they find themselves in because you have Luukkonen, right? I remember the double K and the double U because why not? They added Reimer, which adds a bit of a wrinkle to their goaltending because Devin Levi is the future. But it allows them to put Levi down in Rochester, Reimer to be the backup. If it was Luukkonen and Levi, it wouldn't be any higher than it is. Reimer isn't dragging this down. It's that Luukkonen had a pretty good second half. Levi hasn't shown at the NHL yet that at the NHL level yet that he's ready to be a starter or a 1B. So there's some uncertainty with Buffalo's goaltending, which causes them to be 27th on this board today. So, yeah. Number 26. Toronto. Now, why would I have Toronto at 26? This where Leaf fans will say, well, it's because he hates us. No. Nope. Actually, I'm not sold necessarily on Woll as the starter. He hasn't done that for a full season as of yet. And, of course, he had injury issues this past season, too. And Stolarz, I like Stolarz. I do. I think Stolarz is a very good backup goaltender. I don't know that you can look at the Leafs right now and say their goaltending necessarily belongs much higher than that. You can argue it higher, sure. But neither Woll nor Stolarz have shown an ability to be that starter through a full 80 game or 82 game schedule yet. Toronto is going to have to, ride this out and give these guys, some chance to breathe. A little bit reactionary at times over this past season, I think, with Samsonov. I don't think it necessarily helped at times. And they're going to have to avoid that same kind of reactionary stuff with either Stolarz or Woll. It just, because if you have a bad game as a Toronto goaltender, it's magnified way, way more than if you have a bad game in Carolina, or if you have a bad game in really, locations where you don't get the same level of scrutiny, right? Like if you have a bad game in San Jose while you're playing in San Jose, of course you're going to have a bad game. It's usually not the goaltender's fault. But in the case of Toronto, goaltending blame does come out pretty quickly. Number 25, the LA Kings. So I got the Kings at 25th, so they're in the bottom row. You guys can even look at this as a power rankings if you want. They pick up Kemper from Washington. He had a rough year. I think he can bounce back with LA. And then they have Riddick as the backup. I could argue them up to 25th. I couldn't argue them any higher. So when I was going back and forth on this a bit, and if Woll had been a starter for the Leafs this past season and looked pretty good, I absolutely would have had the Leafs ahead of LA on this board. No problem at all. And Kemper and Riddick would have fallen down to 26. So hopefully Kemper has a bounce back year, but at this stage of his career, it's something that LA's banking on that I don't know there's very many teams would. So that's why LA ends up 25th and in the bottom row. 24th, and another of the California teams gets on the board here. So the California teams, the highest you get is 24th. And the reason being Gibson had a rough year. It was not pretty. And from an advanced stats perspective, it wasn't either. In fact, Dostal is the reason that they're not in the bottom row. I think Dostal's ready to be the starter now, and we'll see how he does this coming season. I like Dostal a lot. But they do have the Gibson question hanging over him a bit, in that the expectation would be that Gibson's likely to get traded, especially if they're ready to give Dostal the starting duties. But the cap hit that Gibson has at $6.4 million, it makes it a little bit trickier. So one thing I could have included with this was the cap hit for the goaltending to see if, the top tandems are the ones that are the most expensive. Spoiler alert, not really. But yeah, so Anaheim I have 24th on the board. Number 23, Vegas. So how could I have Vegas at 23rd? Adin Hill is an excellent goaltender who struggled to stay healthy this past season. Multiple times was out with injury. And then the backup, Samsonov, really needs to bounce back from what was a pretty rough season at points with the Toronto Maple Leafs. I think he'll do fine in Vegas. I do, but I have to go by the stats he had this past season. And again, the fact that Adin Hill did struggle with staying healthy for the full year. And if Hill gets hurt, the goaltending depth in Vegas, I think, has lost something with the trading of Logan Thompson. I'm still surprised Logan Thompson got traded. I think he's a good goaltender. Maybe the GM knows something in Vegas that we don't see with the stats. Maybe Thompson bottoms out with Washington this year, and Vegas ends up looking brilliant. Maybe Samsonov is a huge bounce back year for the Vegas Golden Knights. Number 22. You know, if you're going to say that I am just doing the video this way because I wanted to get that new Utah Magnet on the board in a video, I don't have an answer for that. All right, so in Utah, the tandem right now, you have to think Ingram's the starter, Vejmelka's the backup. At times, especially early in the season, Ingram looked absolutely fantastic for the Arizona Coyotes. By the end of the season, his numbers had kind of leveled out. Vejmelka can be very good against top teams. He's had struggles with the consistency from game to game. So Utah's got themselves two goalies who might be pretty good. Not necessarily excellent, but might be pretty good for them. And maybe this change of scenery, and with all the discussion of moving and buildings and all this being gone, maybe we see this team bounce higher, and maybe I end up being completely wrong. I could be underestimating this tandem. Absolutely agreed. Any on the board can end up being completely wrong by the second week of the season. It's still fun to do, though. Number 21. Lists are fun for me. I've been doing lists since I was very little. Very, very little. 21 is the Chicago Blackhawks. They have Mrazek, who is, I think, a bit underrated at the NHL level at this stage, and Laurent Brossoit. Brossoit being there instead of Soderblom pulls them up a bit in my eyes. I think that Chicago's goaltending is going to keep them in games. I think that Chicago should win, I'll say, an extra 5 games over the last season, maybe 10. And I think the goaltending is going to help him. And for Laurent Brossoit, the door's open there for the first time in his career to maybe push his way into a starter's role. Because while Mrazek has been very good, if Brossoit wins a big game, I don't think Luke Richardson's going to be shy to go back to him for the next one. So maybe this is Brossoit's chance to finally be a starting goaltender at the NHL level. Number 20. And I chuckled when it worked out this way because I don't have magnets for Chicago or Detroit that are the standard ones like this. So I have to go with what I have, right? And Detroit and Chicago, they're both the reverse retros, the ones that look very similar. Detroit, though, I have 20th. And Detroit's got more of a log jam than a tandem that we're looking at. So you have Talbot, you have Lyon, and you have Husso. And in terms of who's going to start and who's going to be the backup, the other question then would be, so does the addition of Talbot indicate that Yzerman thinks they'll need 3 goaltenders? Does it indicate maybe Husso still, got some nagging injury problems? We'll see. Talbot had a good year with LA to begin with, and then in the playoffs he had some struggles. But keep in mind that if he's a good regular season goaltender for Detroit and gets them to those playoffs, then he's kind of done his job, right? It would be upsetting, of course, for Detroit fans if in the first round they just get wiped out, but playoffs are important. So we'll see how it shakes down because it could be Talbot and Husso. It could be Lyon and Talbot. It's not going to be Husso and Lyon unless Talbot has a terrible preseason, which would then bounce back onto Yzerman if that did happen. Number 19. And I debated about where to put Montreal. I like Montreal's tandem. I do. I think the Habs have solid goaltending with... There's Habs fans like, is he going to write Marchessault? I will never do that again. Montembeault and Primo. Without Carey Price, it has kind of forced Montreal to embrace young goaltenders and find that next young goalie. I think Caden Primo's the guy. When it looked uncertain a couple years ago about whether or not Primo would ever really reach that top level that was expected of him, he's fought through it, and I think this past season, especially when they were carrying 3 goaltenders before trading Jake Allen, I think Primo handled it really, really well, and he showed he can work on a lot of rest. So I like Montembeault and Primo. Again, I think much like with Chicago, that's a tandem that should keep Montreal in some games and maybe steal them a few as well. Number 18, another one that I kind of went back and forth on is Carolina. So for the Canes, a team that the goaltending question has been there over the last 12 months, I don't think that it's been answered as of yet because it looks like Freddie Anderson's still going to be the starter, Kochetkov the backup. What's changed with Carolina is that Ronta's gone. Ronta's, exited as a free agent. I don't know that he'd get signed by anybody either at this point in time in his career. But Kochetkov could be the ace in the hole here. Kochetkov could end up being the guy for them. Maybe Freddie Anderson ends up being the backup. We know Anderson gets hurt every year, which drags down Carolina as well, because in the event that Anderson gets hurt, you've got Kochetkov and is it Parrots? So yeah, Carolina, a team that should be a contender. The goaltending could make that difference as to whether or not they're really truly a contender, or maybe just a wild card this year. But we'll see. Number 17. Kind of went back and forth on this one as well. A little bit. But I went back and forth on who I think the starter is going to be. I'm trying to list the starters first on this. And I think it's still going to be Jarry. Even though Nedeljkovic, who's been brought back, is a decent goaltender for them and has shown how solid he can be for long stretches, I still think Jarry ends up being the starter this coming season. So we'll see how that all turns out. But Pittsburgh, again, right near that line, right? And if Pittsburgh's right near the playoff line and don't make the playoffs this year, Penguins fans might have some opinions. Number 16. And what's interesting is Seattle's tandem, it's not that long ago that I would have been ranking it in the bottom row, right? But with Grubauer had a very good season for them. Decord had some solid numbers as well. I think Seattle's goaltending is no longer something that we can look at and go, well, that's going to hold them out of the playoffs. And it's weird because I think the goaltending in their third season, this past season we just had, the best has been in their short history as a hockey team. I thought Grubauer had his best year as a Seattle Kraken goaltender, and yet the team in front of him all of a sudden couldn't score anymore. So that had to be frustrating for the goaltenders to be in a situation where they get all their stuff together and then the forwards are struggling to put the puck in the net. Number 15. So for the Washington Capitals, they're clearly not seeing themselves as a team that needs any kind of a rebuild. Charlie Lindgren had a great regular season, and obviously adding Thompson as the 1B scenario. It wouldn't be surprising if Logan Thompson ends up being the starter in Washington. It also wouldn't be the surprise if Lindgren is. Or if the Caps say, you know what, we're just going to rotate our goaltenders and you have both goalies playing 41 games or starting 41 games, right? So I like Washington's goaltending. I think picking up Thompson, really smart move. Again, I'm not sure what Vegas was seeing in trading out Thompson now because he's still on a pretty bargain contract. It's a ridiculously low cap hit for Logan Thompson. So, yeah, we'll see how things go for Washington this season. The goaltending, I think, is pretty good. Number 14. So, whenever you talk about the Edmonton Oilers and their run, and what's interesting is, every series, Stuart Skinner became a point of conversation, right? So he has a rough game or maybe a couple of rough games. People are like, see, Skinner isn't any good. Skinner needs to go. And then he'd have 3 or 4 really pretty good games. So Skinner and Pickard. Pickard had a good season as the backup. He earns himself a return this year. I like what the Oilers have in net. I don't know if that's going to get them to the promised land of winning a Stanley Cup. But 14th isn't a bad place. So I know that, there will be some who say, look, they went all the way to the final. Their goaltending should be ranked higher. If I was ranking forward groups, they'd be higher than 14th by a lot. But I couldn't get them higher than 14th. Because in 13th, we have a bit of an issue because you've got the Colorado Avalanche. Georgiev is a good goaltender, and he led the league in wins this past season. Annunen, also good goaltender. After a couple of rough appearances earlier in his career at the NHL level, Annunen comes in this year and plays pretty well. But is Georgiev a starter that can get them to the Stanley Cup? That question's still out there. And so he'll have some good games, but he has those stinkers as well. And yeah, I think there's legitimately some questions with Colorado. Keep in mind, too, that Georgiev is a free agent next summer. They're going to have to decide this year, is Georgiev the guy for them that they're going to keep for long term, or will they look in another direction next summer? Number 12, New Jersey. So the Devils definitely improved their goaltending during the season and in the offseason. Markstrom is a very good starter. Yes, he is getting older. Jake Allen's getting older as well, because that's how time works. But I think Markstrom and Allen, pretty solid goaltending tandem. And I think that should steady a New Jersey position that was a problem this past season. Also, the additions on the blue line should help the goaltending numbers. Markstrom's numbers were dragged down a little bit playing behind the defense he had in Calgary. So New Jersey ends up 12th on the board. Number 11, Ottawa. So Ottawa ends up in 11th for picking up Ullmark. That definitely helps. And I think Forsberg's actually a bit underrated. I think Anton Forsberg's a good goaltender and has had a pretty solid run with the Ottawa Senators. I think he's underrated to the point where I have Ottawa just outside the top 10 in goaltending. I do think there's some overestimation of what Ullmark does for the Sens. I do. When he was traded there and I saw some of the, here we go, Ottawa, playoff, this and that, and I thought, well, Ullmark's a better goaltender than what they've had, certainly. But I don't know that I would expect a huge boost in Ottawa's numbers because the defense in front of that goaltending wasn't great last year either. Number 10, and just inside the top 10, St. Louis. So the Blues are in a position where they're one of those teams that we know who their goaltenders are going to be this year, barring injury, and that you should get some good goaltending from both. Binnington's a very good goaltender who is divisive amongst NHL fans and media and all of that for some of his behaviors and whatnot. But you know what? Goaltenders are just generally weird people. Goaltenders will admit they're generally weird people. And sometimes they're also hotheads. We've had hot-headed goaltenders in the NHL before. And usually those goaltenders are pretty successful. Hextall, Smith stand out as two. There have been some goaltenders that, a bit of a temper. Belfour was known for having a bit of a temper on the ice too. So anyways, Hofer I think is a very good backup. I think overall you've got a tandem that should keep St. Louis in the hunt for a playoff spot. I don't know if they stay in that hunt, but the goaltending should help them stay in it for a while. Number 9, Boston. So what would have been a number 1 last year, I'm putting it number 9 this year. I have all the faith in the world for Swayman. I have tremendous concern if Swayman gets hurt and they have to go to Korpisalo. Remember, yes, Swayman's still a restricted free agent. Korpisalo had a brutal season with the Ottawa Senators to the point that if Korpisalo and Forsberg were the tandem for Ottawa, they'd be in the bottom row. So Swayman and Ullmark, bring them up. That's how much of a difference I think Ullmark can make. But for Swayman, he's got to stay healthy. And they got to get him signed. Because if they don't, Korpisalo becomes the starter. And then there's a definite question mark if Korpisalo is the starter. Unless he can bounce back from what was kind of a nightmare year in Ottawa this past season. Number 8. So starting off the top row with Winnipeg. The Jets would probably be higher if they hadn't lost Brisebois. If Brisebois stays there, but he doesn't, and then there's some uncertainty too as to who the backup's going to be. At least I think so. You've got Hellebuck, Comrie, and Kakkonen. So who's going to back up Comrie? I'm kidding. I think at this point in their careers, Kakkonen's probably the better choice as the backup than Comrie. If they waive Comrie and he starts bouncing around the league again, it's a Winnipeg effect because that's what happened the last time the Jets had Comrie. But I think the question about who's going to be the backup and then the question of, Comrie, Kakkonen, and again, if something happens to Hellebuck, Winnipeg's in tight. The problem is that Hellebuck is just so good during the regular season, and he is the Vezina Trophy winner, so I really could justify having Winnipeg lower than 8th. It is an inexact science when you're ranking tandems. Number 7, Nashville. So another team from the Central on the board. It is Saros. It is Wedgwood. Do GMs know that Kevin Lankinen's available? Because, Wedgwood's a good backup, and Saros is an excellent starter. Lankinen, I think, would be an upgrade over some of the backup goaltenders on this board. I think he would. Lankinen put up good numbers in Nashville, but Saros is the guy. He signed the extension. Wedgwood can be a good backup goaltender. So I'm happy that Wedgwood found another job in the NHL. Kind of sad that he's left Dallas. But Dallas still ends up number 6 on the board. So Jake Ottinger, He's not as good during the regular season, I think, as some people may perceive him to be. Like, if you look at his numbers, he's around middle of the pack. But he can raise his game. He absolutely can. And I think DeSmith is a solid backup goaltender for the Dallas Stars. He had a decent year in Vancouver. I know the numbers weren't great by the end of the year in Vancouver. I still think DeSmith gave them pretty good backup job. And so he gets a chance to do that now with Jake Ottinger in Dallas. I think it's going to work out fine. We'll see. I mean, DeSmith showed in Vancouver that if he needs to fill in, he can. And he's not awful as a fill-in. So there's that. But at number 5, DeSmith's former team is at number 5, actually, in Vancouver. And so the question mark with Vancouver is well, there's a couple. So you have Demko, who is a Vezina Trophy nominee this year, and rightfully so. And then the backup is Shelovs. Now, Shelovs was a pretty good goaltender for the Abbotsford Canucks. Not like fantastic and, all-star and all that, but he's a pretty good goaltender. And he showed in the playoffs that he can play in the National Hockey League. So the Canucks now give him a chance as the backup. Now, there were rumors that just before July the 1st, there were rumors that the Canucks might be looking for another goaltender because maybe Demko is not 100%. So this top 5 ranking for the Canucks, I'm a bit nervous about it. I think Gary Bettman's out riding around on a dirt bike. He's been all worked up on sugar today, like he's over for coffee, but I told him to go out and burn off the calories. I think he's out on a dirt bike. So, Shelovs and Demko, I think that's a solid tandem. In the event of an injury for Demko, or if he's not good to go, I have a lot of concern. I have a lot of concern as a Canuck fan in the event that Demko can't start the season, but again, I put Vancouver top 5. Number 4, Florida. So, for people who are paying attention at home, I think that anybody I haven't put to sleep anyways, a lot of Russian goalies on the board from here. So, when I was talking about Florida, and I put Knight as their backup goalie, and the question was asked about Chris Drieger. I think Drieger's an AHL goaltender at this point in time. His numbers in Coachella Valley weren't bad. I think he's an AHL goaltender at this point. I think Spencer Knight gets back into that backup position next year to Bobrovsky. Bobrovsky is so good that even despite the uncertainty in the backup position, I still think that from a tandem perspective, I've got to put him top 4. Either Knight or Drieger, they're not going to play a ton. Bobrovsky, yes, he's in his mid-30s. He could fall off this year. That absolutely could happen. However, at this point in time, going by what happened last season and the Stanley Cup win and everything, I still think Florida's in pretty good shape. Number 3. Tampa Bay. So, you got Vasilevsky and you've got Johansson. Johansson's been okay as a backup. His numbers as a starter, especially if you looked at the advanced stats until Vasilevsky returned to the lineup last year, not great. But as a backup, Johansson, I don't think hurts them, and it's Vasilevsky. Still one of the best goaltenders in the league. He's coming off of a down year by his standards, so I still like Vasilevsky a lot. I think Vasi ends up being the one of the top guys for the Vezina Trophy. I think he'll bounce back from what was a down year for him. Number 2, New York Rangers. The Rangers really performed what I thought was a minor miracle this year. And it wasn't Shesterkin. Igor's just Igor, and he's going to do Igor things. But Quick last season looked as good as he did 5 or 6 years ago. Jonathan Quick, I think playing with the Rangers has prolonged his career. I think he would have been out this summer. But playing with the Rangers, I think, has really rejuvenated him. And he looked pretty good for long stretches of last season. So I can't find any reason not to have the New York Rangers in the top 2, which means number 1. And you know what's funny? So normally, this would be for Sorokin, right? Well, Sorokin's got great numbers, so, the Islanders end up number 1 because Varlamov's a pretty good backup. Actually, this past season, Varlamov was fantastic, and Sorokin had a rough season, but I think he'll bounce back. And since it's one rough season after 3 or 4 really, really good ones, I don't see any reason to worry about Sorokin. And I would say going into this coming season, I would rank their tandem at number 1. But it is an inexact science. You guys can let me know your thoughts in the comment section below, as I'm sure people will. Generally, when I do the list videos, that's how it works. I have never stated that any list that I've put together is like, oh, this is the ultimate. Nah, it's how I would rank them. You guys can let me know your thoughts in the comment section below. Greatly appreciated if and when you do. Thank you guys so much for all your support as always. And yeah, we'll see how this does. This took me quite a while to put together. So hopefully you guys are happy. And if not, that'll be another list video later on in the week too. So there'll be other lists to make you angry for some other reason later on. But thank you guys so much for all your support as always. And I will talk to you again soon.